Welcome to Asian Times TV, the cutting-edge show from Princeton Television that looks at the issues pertinent to the United States as the Pacific pivot plays out in the Asia-Pacific region, the Central Asian region, and in the Middle East. So we have with us today a very special guest. We've had him here before at a critical point, given the news from the Middle East, from Libya, from Yemen this morning, as well as from Egypt, Cairo in particular. We have with us Pepe Escobar from Asia Times, and we're going to be asking him today about what does he think is going on in North Africa, with specifically, obviously, with Arab Spring. He wrote a very interesting piece this morning on asiatimes.com that talks about the blowback that Americans are feeling now as a result of their foreign policy that we've seen play out in Libya, in Egypt, Tunisia, and Syria as well. So, you know, broadly speaking, it's been criticized here as leading from behind. Certainly the Republicans have called and attacked President Obama for appearing to be weak or leading from behind. But we want to know from Pepe Escobar, who's been on the ground in Central Asia and in Southeast Asia and in the Pacific for several years now, what does he think is going on? Pepe, welcome.
Thanks, Dinesh. Hi, everybody. Look, I'll try to sum it all up in just a few words, in fact. The Obama administration, they thought that they had a Middle Eastern policy formulated after the beginning of the so-called Arab Spring in Tunisia and after Egypt. Basically, it was to be aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. So this might have worked in Tunisia. It's not exactly working in Egypt. It will not work in Syria and obviously in Libya.
Wait. So you're saying that President Obama, when he came in, he explicitly wanted to align and give power and weight to the Muslim Brotherhood?
No, not at all. In fact, they formulated a policy after the facts. You remember when Tahrir Square broke out in February 2011?
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton and the Obama administration, they were betting all their horse of the day, in fact, was Omar Suleiman, the chief torturer, which the Tahrir Square protesters used to define as a Sheikh al-Torture. He was the CIA point man for the rendition scheme in Cairo, basically. So this is what the Obama administration wanted to be the probable successor to Mubarak. When there was a sort of internal coup in Egypt and the military around Mubarak decided to get rid of him, but preserve the system, basically. So cutting the head of the snake, but the snake was still roaring, let's put it this way. The Obama administration said, well, who's going to be the next power in Egypt? If they have elections, inevitably, the only political organization that is organized enough is the Muslim Brotherhood. There are Muslim Brotherhoods in Egypt. There are at least 5 different factions, from conservative neoliberals to radicals that are practically Salafi jihadis. So you have which Muslim Brotherhood you're talking about? The so-called conservatives and neoliberals. Al-Shatter, for instance, the Egyptian billionaire, by the way, he was going to be the Muslim Brotherhood candidate for the presidential elections. Then he was vetoed, and we got Mohamed Morsi.
Right. So where do you peg Mohamed Morsi in terms of, you know, he's made some statements that have been seen as in the United States as radical, but where do you put him in the spectrum of, you know, the candidates that stood and ran from the Muslim Brotherhood?
From the point of the Muslim Brotherhood, he is a conservative. He will implement neoliberal policies as much as he can, but in the first few weeks, in the first 2 months especially, he made some moves and counter moves that stunned virtually everyone in the Middle East and outside as well, which was to visit Saudi Arabia, talk to King Abdullah. He got some hazy, vague promises from King Abdullah in terms of investment and helping the new Egyptian government. Then he received a visit from the Emir of Qatar, who went in person to Cairo, talked to Morsi, gave him $2 billion just like that as a down payment, for instance, in terms of further investment. There's a rumored figure of $18 billion of Qatari investment in Egypt in the next few months and 2 years or less.
And of course, America is also promising billions, right? And forgiving debts of billions of dollars, right? I just learned this morning. And that I guess there's a consortium. No, the United States.
But you know, they're trying to go behind the Qatari train, by the way. So it's fantastic because Morsi, he managed to pit the Saudis against the Qataris against the US to see who is going to prop up my government.
Right.
Because they know if my government falls, it's going to be chaos, total chaos. Right. Especially after he sidelined SCAF, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces in Egypt. In a very, very clever move, because this happened the day after the visit of the Emir of Qatar. So he talked to the Emir, he got a promise that he would get a lot of money, starting with the $2 billion. The same day or the next day, less than 24 hours later, he organized the purge of the old SCAF leadership. New officers came to power. They wanted to come to power anyway before, but they couldn't because of the old guard, starting with Field Marshal Tantawi, which was the military ruler of Egypt until Morsi was elected president. And now he's pitting all these powers against each other because he knows that the key problem for Egypt is to get some cash short term. The country is broke. There are no revenues. They get a little bit of money from renting the Suez Canal. There's no tourism to speak of, and it's not returning in the near future. So there's nothing. They sell a little bit of gas, Arab gas pipeline, but they have a deficit of $36 billion, and they don't know how to pay it. Even if they have IMF money, full of conditionalities, of course, they're talking about 4.5, 4.8 billion. It's nothing for Egypt. So he needs money badly. And who are the candidates? Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the US. The thing is, the US may promise a lot of things to Morsi because they are terrified of what may happen if the Morsi government collapses.
So in terms of...
Khalifa is taking power in Egypt, starting to the next day, that kind of stuff.
So in terms of the event that just unfolded a couple days ago, the raising of the embassy walls by a small band of Egyptians in Cairo, and then the killing of the ambassador in Benghazi, and then now apparently this morning also unrest spreading to Yemen as well around the embassy. And of course everybody's very nervous here with 2 months to go in the election, and allegations are flying back and forth. Romney, of course, is saying that the president is leading from behind, that he's weak, that he apologizes, and of course Obama is saying that Romney, shoots first and aims later. So all this kind of rhetoric is going on. And of course Morsi, at least as of now, had not made a statement condemning the unrest at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo. Is that your understanding as well?
Yes, it is. And it's interesting because in the Ikhwan Arabic site, there's not even a hint of condemnation. There's some sort of praise to what happened in Cairo. And the Ikhwan's English site, it's a completely different message. More or less condemn it, but not condemn it forcefully, which is something that the U.S. would expect from Egypt at the moment. The thing is, the timing of what happened in Egypt and in Libya, the way it was coordinated, in my own interpretation, this has something to do with the screwed Made in California production by an Egyptian Coptic exiled in the U.S. posing as a Jewish businessman.
Yeah,
That's
so
the
but
story.
we don't know who that is, right? We don't know the identity of that person yet.
Apparently, this person, Basil, his name, doesn't exist at all.
Right.
It's a guy that was interviewed by AP yesterday,
Right.
and he's Egyptian Copt, in fact, exiled in the U.S. So this is just a pretext, in fact. What I wrote for Asia Times, and more or less confirmed with some of my good sources, this was directly related to the video that Ayman al-Zawahiri released to celebrate 9/11 Al-Qaeda style.
2 days ago, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
When
42-minute video that he released 2 days
Exactly.
ago to sort of commemorate the 11th year anniversary of 9/11.
But we can say it's a legitimate Al-Qaeda production.
Okay.
In fact, it's not a fake video. It's him. And for the first time since the fact, which was the killing by a drone, by the way, in Waziristan of Abu Yahya al-Libi, that was on June 4th. And for the first time, Ayman al-Zawahiri admits that he was killed 3 months ago in a drone strike.
Now, Abu Yahya al-Libi, you have to clarify who that is. It's an important number 2 person now in the Al-Qaeda organization, right?
Exactly. And the most important thing is he was captured in Afghanistan. He spent 3 years in Bagram from 2002 and 2003 in Afghanistan. He escaped from Bagram from the apparently impregnable Bagram. When you go there, you think you are in a movie set in terms of production values. But these guys managed to escape Bagram anyway, of course, because the guards of Bagram, they are Afghans. So it's very easy to bribe them. No problem. In 2005, he went into hiding. He got back to Libya. He was part of the amnesty conceded by Saif al-Islam in 2010, alongside Abdel Hakim Belhaj, the leader of the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group. And Yahya al-Libi is the same thing. So this proves once again the direct link between the Libyan Islamic Fighting Group and Al-Qaeda. And in fact, he trained in an Al-Qaeda camp north of Kabul. I went to this camp in 2000 to give you. And at the time, there were a lot of Libyans in this camp.
Okay, wait. So are you making the direct connection between the freedom fighters?
Of course, in 2000,
Yeah.
Hakim Belhaj and al-Libi, they were training at this camp as well.
So are you?
After, of course, 9/11, the American bombardment, etc., they escaped, and some of them were captured, including, of course, Belhaj, which was captured in Malaysia. Then he was rendered to Bangkok. Then he was rendered back to Libya. He was tortured in Libya. He stayed in jail, and he was liberated by Saif al-Islam alongside al-Libi in 2010. So you see, the whole thing is connected.
Wait. So are you also saying that the same freedom fighters that Ambassador Stevens, then hired and banded together to take down Gaddafi are the same group or same network of people?
Yes, totally.
Who have now attacked the embassy?
I would say I'm practically sure. They call themselves Ansar al-Islam, the group who attacked the embassy.
So how come this is not known here? I mean, the media here is not covering this at all.
Of course not, because this implodes completely the narrative of the war on terror. Blowback basically is the real story. The cover story is the war on terror. There was never a war on terror. This was for show. It was a scam. It was a hoax. So, because you remember the Bush administration in the early 2000s, they were looking for an enemy. They said, wow, antagonize China at the moment, maybe it's too complicated. Let's find an easier enemy. And while they were striving to find the easier enemy, which was the Islamic world, basically, as a whole, 9/11 happened, and that was the perfect pretext for them to adapt a planning that had started in the late 80s, by the late 90s, by the neocon.
That's the neocon. That's the neocon agenda, which now is shelved, right?
Exactly, that's the neocon agenda.
Okay.
The difference with the Obama administration, they examined, they surveyed the battlefield. They said, this is not going anywhere. War on terror. We're going to have to, very Orwellian sense, rename all this. We're going to go through the UN. We're going to do the same thing, but with some legalese behind us. That's the concept of R2P, responsibility to protect, and humanitarian interventionism, and humanitarian bombing, which is
So you're saying that in July of 2009, when President Obama goes to Cairo and extends his hands of friendship to the Egyptians at the University of Cairo, and goes to Turkey as well, and he makes a speech in Indonesia almost a year later. The Islamic outreach that he did was, I mean, I'm not sure, what are you suggesting? Well, this is all PR?
It was PR. It was directed to, I would say, more secular Muslims, or not radical Muslims like you find a lot in Turkey or in Indonesia for that matter. Islam in Indonesia is really softcore compared to what you see with the Wahhabis in the Persian Gulf in general, in fact. Right. But the problem is the Obama administration, they bombed their own strategy by aligning themselves with Al-Qaeda style jihadis, Salafi jihadis. What happened in Libya, and especially what is happening in Syria. When you see that the component of Salafi jihadis coming from not only Libya, a contingent of Libyans went there, led by Belhaj, by the way, last year, but crossing the border from Iraq, those Iraqi Sunni, hardcore Sunni resistance that was fighting the U.S. a few years ago. I remember very well, 2004, 2005, when I was there. They migrated to Syria, and now they're fighting another secular regime. They were fighting the Ba'ath Party in Iraq, Saddam Hussein, and now they're fighting the Ba'ath Party in Syria, the Assad dynasty. It's the same people, basically. And they took over, I wouldn't say most, but a great deal of the so-called resistance. And the people who defected from the Syrian army, the official Syrian army, and constituted the so-called Free Syrian Army, it's infested with jihadis from all over, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, the tribal areas, Yemen. There are Palestinians as well, Iraqis, and a lot of people from Northern Africa, Algerians, Moroccans, and a lot of Libyans as well.
But you're not suggesting that America should be directly involved, right?
What?
You're not suggesting America should be directly involved in Syria, though, right?
No, in Syria they are leading from behind. Right. It's true. This is one thing that the Republicans got right when they say that Obama is leading from behind in both Egypt and Syria. There's no question about it. Okay. And in Libya, it was not exactly from behind, because this was a NATO operation. Right. Everybody knows in Brussels, if you talk to them off the record, of course, that NATO basically is the European arm of the Pentagon. Nothing is decided at NATO without the Pentagon saying so.
Right. And so in this 42-minute videotape, El Zawahiri says, according to the AFP press release,
the tape an hour ago again.
What is that?
I just watched the tape half an hour ago again.
Yeah. He basically says that he singles out President Obama for being a liar, who was elected to trick Muslims around the world, but who nevertheless is being defeated in Afghanistan. He also mentions Warren Weinstein, an elderly U.S. aid worker who's been kidnapped in Pakistan by Al-Qaeda just over a year ago, and vowing to keep him in captivity, right? So, and that the fight goes on. And you're making a direct link, of course, between Yahya al-Libi getting knocked off month and a half ago, or 2 months ago, I think is what you're saying. On June 4th.
3 months ago. It was June 4th.
June 4th. Right. And
so I think it took 3 months for Al-Qaeda to organize some sort of response.
Okay.
You know.
So what do you predict is going to happen now? What do you think is going to be a response now that this has happened on the 11th anniversary of 9/11?
The only response I see from the Obama administration in Libya is let's drone them out of existence. Basically, this is what's going to happen. Expect a lot of drones hitting targets south of Benghazi. This is more or less in the Dera region. Dera is it's a village in the middle of nowhere in the desert south of Benghazi, which has been historically a very important a connection point and source of hardcore Salafi jihadis, Libyans, who then went to Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan. So this is where the drones will be bombing for the next weeks or months, I expect. So this is going to be just like the shadow war in Yemen and in Somalia. So we're going to see a shadow drone war inside Libya as well. So, you know, in terms of irony, we could even speculate that after condemning Gaddafi to death because he was supposed to be planning a bombing of Benghazi, we would see the US 1 year later actually bombing Benghazi. Well, it's not Benghazi, but they'll be bombing the area around Dera, which was until yesterday considered you know, a very important area in terms of the liberation of Libya, Libya, implanting Libya as a democratic state. We knew this from the beginning. It was totally absurd. If you study a little bit of the story of tribalism in Libya and the way Cyrenaica tribes are opposed to more westernized part of the country, including Tripoli, on that, we knew that the local tribes were just positioning themselves to get a better deal in a post-Gaddafi environment. And that explains why militias are fighting against each other in Libya nowadays. Nowadays, Libya is militia hell. It reminds me of Iraq in 2004, 2005, which was militia hell all the way. The difference is at the time, there was the American army over there to bribe the militias into, okay, you forget about your fighting against us, we'll get you some money, and when we leave, you can do anything you want. Now, there's nothing.
But Ambassador Stevens, right, the gentleman who got killed,
the government in Tripoli is totally helpless to control the militias that are virtually ruling the country.
I see.
I would say block by block or checkpoint by checkpoint, in fact.
I see. So, but Ambassador Stevens, who actually was there, has been there for a number of years, right? He was made ambassador, as you rightly point out, after Gaddafi was deposed.
Yeah.
Are you suggesting he just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time?
Yes, look.
Or was he targeted in some way? Or is that by the same forces that he had recruited?
In fact, he was targeted by the forces he was in bed with. I think this is a more accurate description, because most of the NATO rebels, the so-called leaders of the NATO rebels, now they are in a position of power in Tripoli as well. They are more or less trying to run the country. But the Salafi jihad element, which was very strong in the NATO rebel operation or narrative, now they're totally out of control. And guess what? They were weaponized by NATO itself. Okay. It's weapons that the Saudis and the Qataris and the CIA helped to buy or bought themselves and then gave it to the rebels. Now they are in the hands of a lot of Salafi jihadi hardcore people. Just like the RPG that shot the car where Christopher was a best narrative that we had. This RPG was probably financed by Saudis or the Qataris.
I see. So so in the short term, it becomes unsafe, you would say, for American diplomats to be, openly sort of transacting and dealing and wheeling in the North African region, Libya, Egypt.
At least in the whole area.
Right. And you would say this is going to get worse in the next few months?
It will get worse because it's a mix of elements, in fact. This video, it's one element. There's a very, I would say, disgusting component of the whole thing, because when you have a Danish newspaper issuing a series of cartoons denigrating Prophet Muhammad, for instance, or when you have a shadow source in the US producing a hateful video against Islam and against Prophet Muhammad once again. You see protests all over the spectrum. Northern Africa, Middle East, all across, all directly to Central Asia. The key thing everybody knows in the Muslim world, and even Islamists know about it, is the Palestine question. And you don't see people enraged or mobilized all across the Muslim world, the Arab world especially, to try to pressure Israel to be slightly more civilized vis-a-vis Palestine. This is the real disgusting thing. It's a YouTube phenomenon. In fact, it catches a short attention span of
right. But the larger dynamic, but
YouTube.
Yeah.
But the big story escapes them completely.
So the big story is that it was 11th anniversary of 9/11, and the broader strategy against war on terror, now, of course, with a different name to the Obama administration, is now having a blowback. What is that?
Kinetic military action. That's the White House terminology.
Right.
Official.
Right. But that's where the blowback is coming from. That's what you're suggesting?
The blowback it's very similar to what happened in the Afghan jihads in the 1980s. But the blowback in Afghanistan after the Soviet Union decided to leave Afghanistan and there was a civil war and the Taliban came to power, the blowback over there, it took 10 years or even more to materialize. In this case nowadays, it took a few months.
Right.
Don't forget that the Gaddafi regime ended less than a year ago in Libya.
Right.
In Egypt, the 25% of Salafi jihadis, which ideologically are very close to the people who committed this attack against the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, they were voted actually in this. This means 1/4 of the voters in Egypt, they are in agreement with the Salafi jihadi ideology, which is an Islamic caliphate all over the place. So this is very dangerous.
Right.
And the problem with the Obama administration, they didn't know from the beginning what to do. The Republicans didn't have a clue to start with, and they still don't. With the Obama administration, they were making their foreign policy vis-a-vis Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and Syria on the go. They saw basically an opening, especially in Syria, to, let's go directly against what they call the axis, what the people in Southwest Asia call the axis of resistance, Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah. So let's go straight against them. If we cut off Syria, we cut off the link between Iran and Hezbollah. So it's a victory for our camp. And our camp includes, of course, the Persian Gulf petromonarchies, which they're Sunni, Wahhabis, hardcore American clients, and they consider Shiites infidels. So the Obama administration joined a war against Shiites, which is completely absurd. This means they're in a war against Shiites in Iraq as well, and in a war against Shiites in Afghanistan as well, in Pakistan as well, and even in India as well. It's completely absurd. They don't differentiate this shades of Shiism in the Shiite world. Just because of this obsession, comes back to the obsession with Iran. So if you want to weaken Iran, you have to attack Syria. It's a completely different thing because Syria is a pillar of the Arab world. If you destabilize Syria, you destabilize the whole region. It goes back to the Sykes-Picot Agreement. You destabilize everything that was built by Western powers over the past 100 years, in fact. And now I think this is starting to dawn on the Obama administration. They're not going to do anything radical in the next 2 months. The only preoccupation that I see is for Obama to make sure he wins this election. Afterwards is another story. They'll keep improvising, of course, foreign policy.
Well, I mean, but his policy in terms of drones and interrogations has continued. He has pulled back from Iraq. He has a plan to pull back out of Afghanistan. But now this North African, obviously, belt situation has completely complicated the narrative.
Exactly.
And what we're getting from the opposite side, unfortunately, is more bluster.
Yeah, what we're getting from the Romney side is we are against Russia, we are against China, and we're going to bomb Iran. That's a fantastic foreign policy, isn't it? If you are a nutty professor kind of think tanker. It doesn't work in the...
He's surrounded by the old, he's surrounded by the neocon.
Exactly. If you look at the list of his foreign policy advisors, it's neocon country all over again. What do you expect? Exactly. So for them is the domino theory.
So on that note,
absolutely.
Pepe, thank you so much for joining us, enlightening us on this very complicated region, very complicated issue, which is just unfolding.
Surface. For your viewers and listeners, this is just the
tip of the iceberg, yes.
of the iceberg.
All right. Thank you for joining us. Thank you, Pepe. Thank you, our viewers. We'll see you again next week. Thank you.